House will come to order. The pledge will be offered by Dylan Crowder, homeschooled, grandson of Senator Crowder, Monte Vista, Colorado.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag and the United States of America.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Culler, please call the roll.
Representatives Arndt. Becker J. Becker K. excused. Brown. Buck. Buckner. Carver. Conti. Corum. Court. Danielson. Del Grosso. Dorr. Representative Dorr.
No, I didn't. And I'm not hearing calling Janet, so I hope I
Representative Dorr. Okay.
Representative Dorr excused.
Duran. Esgar. Everett. Fields. Foote. Garnett. Janal. Hamner. Humphrey. Joshi. Kagan. Representative Kagan. Representative Daniel Kagan. Present. Kaiser. Klingenschmidt. Krafttharp. Landgraf. Lawrence. Madam Speaker. Representative Dorr is present. Representative Lawrence excused. Lebsock. Lee. Lontine. Lundeen. McCann. Melton. Mitch Bush is excused. Moreno. Navarro. Neville. Nordberg. Babone. Pedersen. Primavera. Priola excused. Rankin. Ransom. Rosenthal. Rupe. Bryden. Sane. Salazar. Singer. Singer called. He's running late.
Representative Singer excused.
Zabo. Representative Zabo. I haven't heard from her.
Representative Zabo excused.
Tate. Thurlow. Tyler. Van Winkle. Vigil. Willett. Williams. Wilson. Windholtz. Winter. Representative Winter. Young. Madam Speaker.
Present. Representative Arndt. Let's see. Oh, wait, I beg your pardon. What do we have?
Sorry.
Are there 1 minute? With 59 present, 6 excused, a quorum is present. Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the journal be approved from yesterday, January 15th, 2015.
You've heard the motion that the journal be adopted as corrected by the chief clerk. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Oh, that wasn't very good. Motion passes. Let's see. Announcements and introductions. Representative Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I have a very special guest with me today. One of my favorite constituents, my good friend and newly sworn in Adams County Commissioner Steve Odorizio. Please help me welcome in.
Further announcements or introductions? Representative Buck.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, Junior Livestock, you're going to just ready for this? Are you sitting down? We raised $1,000. No kidding. So we are competing against the Senate. So let's keep raising money for the Junior Livestock Association. I want to thank you so much for supporting those wonderful kids that are in agriculture. So continue to give. Thank you.
Representative Krafthar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank our county commissioners, our partners, working local, state, together. Thank them for being here today, and especially my county commissioner, Don Rozier.
No, that's fine. Representative Wilson. One can introduce elected officials.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I would also like to take a moment to introduce a couple of my county commissioners seated over here on the right from Custer County, and also indicate one of these gentlemen, in order to be here, just to get you in tune to the rural challenge, got up at 4 o'clock this morning so they could be here. Thank you, gentlemen.
Representative Vigil.
What? Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's members of the Capital Development Committee heads up. I don't know if Zabo's here or not, but there's been a misprint in the calendar. It says Tuesday at 7:30. It's actually 8:15 and 3:56. So just wanted to point that out that the time's been changed. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Quorum.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to take the wind out of Representative Buck's sail because, frankly, $1,000 is not going to cut it. Last year, that steer cost $7,000. Now, granted, the Senate also works on this, but you know, if we can't come up with $3,000 or $4,000, this is a good program. It's good PR for the House of Representatives. So please step forward. Do everything you can. Thank you.
Representative Bryden.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm not sure she is in the room, but I want us all to welcome our County Commissioner, Nancy Sharp, from Arapahoe County. And also, Madam Speaker,
Yes.
I'm not sure we'll be on the floor when they're here, but my students from Antelope Ridge Elementary School will be here this morning, and we want to welcome them. Thank you.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have talked to the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader and would ask to be excused at 10:45 this morning. They have agreed that that would be all right.
You're excused.
Thank you.
Representative Janal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to welcome Larimer County Commissioner Lou Gator, who is here today. Welcome to the House.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Even though I'm a Denver legislator, I'd like to welcome a county commissioner from Pitkin County. Her name is Rachel Richards. She's not in the room, but she's a very good and dear friend of mine. And so it goes with my effort to branch out and explore Colorado and appreciate all of our diversity in our rural areas. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to ask to be excused at 11 a.m. today, and I have gone through the proper channels with the Majority Leader.
You are excused, Representative Williams. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would like to also introduce, and I don't think they're in here right now, but my county commissioner from La Plata County, Brad Blake, and also Commissioner Ben Tisdale from Ouray County. They've come a long ways to be with the CCI this week, and so if you would, let's give them a hand.
Representative Brown.
And also, I'd like to announce that tomorrow, January 17th, is CSU Day at the National Western, and you can get a discount off of your rodeo tickets at 11 a.m. And let's go out there and let's support the National Western and CSU.
Further announcements or introductions? Seeing none, the next order of business is consideration of resolutions. Mr. Kohler, please read the title of HJR 1005.
House Joint Resolution 1005 by Representatives Ransom and Melton, also Senator Lundberg, concerning the commemoration of the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Representatives Ransom and Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move House Joint Resolution 15-1005 and ask that it be read at length.
Whereas the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15, 1929, graduated from Morehouse College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1948, graduated from Crozer Theological Seminary in 1951, and received a PhD from Boston University in 1955. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's faith, resiliency, and commitment to justice became known worldwide through his speeches, writings, and actions. And whereas Reverend Dr. King declared that the moral responsibility to aid the oppressed did not stop at the edge of his street, town, or state when he wrote, "I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And whereas Reverend Dr. King withstood attacks on his home and family, among numerous other threats and setbacks, standing firm in his conviction that although the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice. And whereas Reverend Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott, a 13-month protest beginning in 1955 against the segregated city bus lines. And whereas the Montgomery bus boycott led to the integration of the Montgomery city bus system and is widely credited as the beginning of the civil rights movement in America. And whereas, in 1957, Reverend Dr. King was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization formed to provide leadership for the burgeoning civil rights movement. And whereas, between 1957 and 1968, Reverend Dr. King spoke more than 2,500 times, wrote 5 books as well as numerous articles, led protests, helped register African American voters, was arrested more than 20 times, was awarded 5 honorary degrees, was named Man of the Year by Time magazine, and became the symbolic leader of the African American community as well as a world figure. And whereas on August 28, 1963, Reverend Dr. King directed the March on Washington, wherein more than 200,000 Americans gathered in the name of equality and civil rights, and which culminated in Reverend Dr. King's historic I Have a Dream speech. And whereas the leadership of Reverend Dr. King was instrumental in bringing about landmark legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited segregation in public accommodations and facilities and banned discrimination based on race, color, or national origin, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which eliminated remaining legal barriers to voting for disenfranchised African American voters. And whereas in 1964, Reverend Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his tireless and selfless work in the pursuit of justice for African Americans and other oppressed people in America. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's 13 years of nonviolent leadership ended abruptly and tragically when on April 4, 1968, he was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's life and work continue to echo in our lives as we strive to reach the lofty goal he set when he said, "Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty." And whereas Reverend Dr. King's birthday is a federal holiday in the United States and a state holiday in the state of Colorado, which is celebrated each year on the 3rd Monday in January. And whereas on Monday, January 19th, 2015, we celebrate the 29th anniversary of Reverend Dr. King's holiday. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 70th General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the Senate concurring herein, that we, the members of the Colorado General Assembly, hereby encourage appropriate observances, ceremonies, and activities to commemorate the federal and state legal holiday honoring the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. throughout all cities, towns, counties, school districts, and local governments within Colorado. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to President Barack Obama, Honorable Governor John Hickenlooper, the Congressional Black Caucus, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, and the members of Colorado's congressional delegation, Senators Michael Bennet and Cory Gardner, and Representatives Diana DeGette, Jared Polis, Scott Tipton, Ken Buck, Doug Lamborn, Mike Kaufman, and Ed Perlmutter.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler. And before we continue with debate on this resolution, I need to announce that Senator Aguilar will be added as a co-prime sponsor in the Senate. Representative Melton and Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In 1807, the British Commonwealth abolished its transatlantic slave trade after long years of perseverance against the deep entrenchment of slavery in the economy of the empire. Disappointing setbacks and failures were suffered on many occasions before the British parliamentarian and philanthropist William Wilberforce and his colleagues savored the sweet victory for which they had so long prayed for, hoped for, and tirelessly worked for. In his young years, Wilberforce had been deeply influenced by his friendship with John Newton, former slave ship captain turned clergyman and author of the famous Christian hymn, Amazing Grace. In time, Wilberforce became a Christian, and it was this personal conversion experience that caused him to embark on a 20-year-long battle against the practice of slavery. He died on July 29, 1833, just 3 days after hearing that the passage through Parliament of the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 was assured. The British Empire had finally rid itself of the scourge of slavery. In 3 short decades, a continent away, a similar battle would be raging against the evil of slavery, but in this conflict, brothers would take up arms against brothers. Shortly before his death, William Wilberforce had penned these words: "America, as a Christian and a free country, cannot but entertain that slavery is alike incompatible with the law of God and with the well-being of man." Upon Civil War battlefields, Wilberforce's words would be tested, but in the end, the country would prove them true. Slavery puts man at war with God and with other men and would no longer be tolerated in a Christian and free America. President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which was followed soon thereafter by ratification of the 13th Amendment. In 1865, slavery in America came to an end, but the battle for freedom was just beginning. 64 years later, Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta on January 15, 1929. He was destined to rise up in the spirit of Wilberforce and Lincoln and take up that same banner for the cause of liberty and justice. This time, the fight would be waged against segregation and racial discrimination. Dr. King went forward with unyielding conviction that God had created all men equal, taking his stand while he strongly proclaimed that it was up to good men of conscience of every color to act selflessly and speak truthfully without guile in order to bring about the end of segregation in the United States. So it is that each year on the third Monday of January, Americans commemorate the birth and life of Martin Luther King Jr. As befits the occasion, we remember his work and influence in the civil rights arena, and we honor the man behind the deeds.
Representative Winholtz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I'd like to read some excerpts from the letters of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963 while he was detained in the Birmingham jail. In his letter, Dr. King reflected upon the lives of great men and women of character whose words and deeds inspired his own actions. I am in Birmingham because justice is here, because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their own hometown, and just as Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to particularly every hamlet and city of the Greco-Roman world, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Dr. King continues some paragraphs later to address the characterization of his actions as untimely, as well as his critics' assertions that he and other demonstrators were willing to break laws. Listen to the answer Dr. King gave his detractors. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in every ear of every Negro with with a pricing familiarity. This weight has almost always meant never. He continues, we must come to see with the distinguished jurist of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men and women are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of courting despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Speaking to his critics, Dr. King wrote, you express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. One may ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer is found in the fact that there are two types of justice. Justice are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would agree that with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with moral law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality.
Representative Szabo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. From Dr. King's remarks, what are we to conclude about the foundations of justice? That a man's keeping or breaking of any law is subject to his own views, or that law as to whether it is just or unjust? Or does Dr. King justify acts of civil disobedience based upon the premise that supreme truth has been established by God and exists over and above man-made codes? It would be hard to argue, I think, that Dr. King thought anything other than that just law derives its authority from the divine. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced subliminally by the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the law of Nebuchadnezzar on the grounds that a higher moral law was involved. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to unjust laws of the Roman Empire. Dr. Martin Luther King was a man who tirelessly co-labored with God and men to win the struggle against segregation. He eventually took some satisfaction in being branded as an extremist. For this label placed him in the company of his Lord and with men throughout the ages whose lives had not only encouraged, but also inspired him. And I quote Dr. King, "Was not Jesus an extremist of love? Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters in righteousness, like a mighty stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the gospel of Jesus Christ? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus was not Martin Luther, an extremist. Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise, so help me God. And John Bunyan. I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a mockery of my conscience. Was not Abraham Lincoln an extremist? This nation cannot survive half slave and half free. Was not Thomas Jefferson an extremist? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice?
Representative Rupe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dr. King's letter authored from behind the Birmingham jail walls continues. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggles in Birmingham, or even the motives are presently misunderstood. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation because the goal of America is freedom. Dr. King was clear about the moral things of life and was unashamed to testify to them and to God, from whom he believed that moral law comes. He was careful to do not only the right thing, but to do the right thing reasons. And he placed the cause to which he had devoted himself into the providential hands of God. Dr. King concludes his prophetic and masterful letter with these words. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the old, oppressed, battered Negro woman, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman of Montgomery, Alabama, who rose with the sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride the segregated buses. They will be the young high school and college students, young ministers of gospel, and a host of their elders courageously and nonviolently sitting at lunch counters and willing to go to jail for conscience sake. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values of our Judeo-Christian heritage. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr.
Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To perhaps best describe the heart and mind of Dr. King, we look back to the words of Abraham Kuyper, a Dutch politician, journalist, and theologian at the turn of the 20th century, who said, "When the principles that run against your deepest convictions begin to win the day, then the battle is your calling, and peace has become sin. You must, at the price of dearest peace, lay your convictions bare before friend and enemy with all the fire of your faith." As we honor the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., let us dedicate ourselves to serving selflessly on behalf of those whom we represent. May God bless America and the work of our hands. Amen.
Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I am honored and pleased to move this resolution, being one of the first resolutions before this body, and being done so in a bipartisan fashion. I think it is a true testament to the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. From the great sacrifices and efforts that he made for racial equality, we honor Dr. King. He was a man that saw past our differences and believed in the good of the individual. Because of his convictions, we move closer in this country towards tolerance, understanding, and cooperation. He has been a personal inspiration to me since I was a young kid listening to his speeches in classrooms. I'm reminded of one that he spoke to middle school students in 1967 when he said, "When you discover what you will be in your life, set out to do it as if God Almighty called you at this particular moment in history to do it. Don't just set out to do a good job, set out to do a job so good that the living, the dead, and the unborn could not do it any better. If it falls on your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well. His words and his passion spoke, or his words and the passion that he spoke pushed me to be more than what I am. In my office hangs a photograph of him that was taken here in Colorado, just a few blocks away from here. And it is a constant reminder to me of the struggle and the challenges that we faced as a nation, but that he stood up and faced along with us to make our nation better, to make it so that way no matter what your race or your ethnicity or your gender or belief, or no matter what your economic or social class were, that everyone have the opportunity to succeed and be more than what they are. And so today, we honor him and remember him for his great work, and I ask that we continue that work in this chamber by passing this resolution and moving forward for equality for all. I thank you so much.
Representative Fields.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and you sure do look good up there. I want to thank the sponsors, Melton and Ransom, for bringing forth this resolution to give us some time to reflect on the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, I can still recall the day when I heard that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. I was in Baltimore, Maryland, and I can tell you that my community was shaken and my confidence in public safety was broken. The night before Dr. King was assassinated, he was speaking to sanitation workers who were gathered together for a strike. And I want to read these words to you. He said, like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop, and I looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that tonight, we as a people will get to the promised land. Here we are in 2015, and we're still dealing with some of the issues that Dr. King was fighting for, income equality. It's still a relevant issue for us today, for working families, and it's also an issue as it relates to equal pay for equal work. I also remember Dr. Martin Luther King's speech. There's a quote that inspired me, and it motivates me, and that speech was about the content of character. When I think about the content of character, I think about what builds character. The quote reads as follows: I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I think Dr. King was challenging us to imagine an America where there was a climate that did not foster prejudice. I think he was telling us in that quote that we need to stop putting people down, that we needed to defend the weak, and that we need to speak out against hate, and we need to speak out against wrong. He was saying, I may not get there with you, but I'm hoping that my children will. Hickenlooper, in his State of Address, also challenged us by saying he wanted to make sure that every child in every corner in the state of Colorado has access to a quality education. He was telling us that our work is not finished. So when I think about that quote, the content of character and not being judged by the color of your skin, I think he was also reframing the Declaration of Independence, which says that all men are created equal. So today, I challenge each of you with the final quote from Dr. King, and he says that our lives begins to end the day that we become silent about things that matter. And so when I think about the protesters that we have in Ferguson, I want to tell them, don't be silent. When I think about the protesters in New York, I want to tell them, don't be silent. We must not be silent in this chambers because content of character is based on the principles and the values that we stand for. I miss you, Martin Luther King.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I first want to say thank you to Representative Melton and Representative Ransom for bringing us HJR 151005 as we commemorate the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. Members, 46 years ago, we lost a visionary. Today, we are gathered here not only to remember and celebrate Martin Luther King's legacy, but to appreciate what we have gained from the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King affected generations of Americans with his struggle for civil rights. America has made significant progress since the turbulent 1960s. Yet we still face many human rights challenges today. We still need to fight against poverty. We still need to fight against educational gaps. We still need to fight against discrimination for our seniors and for minorities. And as I reflect on the life and the legacy of Dr. King, what comes to mind is, what would Dr. King think about what is taking place in our society today? The killing of black males across our country. 46 years. 46 years later, we are still fighting for civil rights and equality. The next thing that comes to my mind are our youth of today. And I wonder what Dr. King's legacy means to them. So I asked a student at East High School, what does Dr. King's life and legacy mean to you and your classmates today? And I quote this, members. My classmates and I find it easy to take Dr. King and other civil rights leaders' achievements for granted. We attend an integrated school, and we often hear claims about that we live in a post-racial society. As the cases of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and Eric Garner have taught us, simply because Jim Crow is dead does not mean that hatred, bigotry, and racism are relics of the past. Hatred, bigotry, and racism have manifested itself in more subtle ways. We are left with the task of carrying on Dr. King's work, of realizing his dream, of not just tolerating one another, but loving each other as brothers and sisters, of achieving justice for all. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Salazar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to serve with you. So, I'm going to recount something personal November 11th of 2014 marked the 20th anniversary for myself of when I first became a civil rights investigator for the state of Colorado. And before that, I was a student activist leading marches, protests, and things of that nature on the CU campus. And that all came about because of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King and the words of Angela Davis, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Sitting Bull, Geronimo, so many others. Because over the span of time, over centuries, it just seems, and as my colleagues over here on the opposite side of the aisle have indicated, there are so many people who have spoken on the passion of equality in the world. I believe that someone had mentioned a Dutch philosopher possibly who was talking about it. These messages resonate through time because they're true. There's nothing that seems to change that message, that there needs to be equality in this world in order for us to be able to move forward together, not only as a nation, but as an earth. And so it's not about quoting Martin Luther King or quoting a philosopher from some time back or somebody else from the 1800s and moving into the 1900s. It's about living it every single day. Because words are just merely words. We know that to be true. So it's not about quoting Martin Luther King. It's about living civil rights. It's not about recounting history. It's about living civil rights today. It's not about talking about what was. It's about recognizing the beautiful things that can, should, and will be for racial equality, gender equality, equality for members of all disadvantaged communities. That's the test. Not how many quotes we can memorize and spout out in one particular day, but how we live those quotes every single day and how we work with each other in trying to figure out what that equality looks like. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the good Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, because he and so many others moved me on my path. And it's a path that I try to live at least every single day. Thank you.
Representative Buckner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too want to express my appreciation for the resolution. I think that what I want most out of this day is for us to protect this holiday, not the observance of the holiday, but the intent of the holiday. The intent of this holiday is for us to live this as a basis, a basic value as a body and as a society. Martin Luther King holiday should remind us to look back over the year's work that we've done and decide whether or not we are trying to reach those goals on a daily basis. This is not about Dr. Martin Luther King Day. In fact, if I think back, Dr. King wouldn't have wanted a holiday. He would have wanted an everyday. He worked every day to lead us to the kind of institutions and supports and systems that achieved his dream. And we need to do that as a body, every day, everybody. And so I want to protect this holiday only as a reminder that the other 364 days are more important. I appreciate the efforts of everyone with regard to this, and I want to encourage you to increase those efforts. And I thank everyone for their observance of this day. Thank you very much.
Representative Tyler.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and thank you all for bringing this resolution today. It's an honor to stand down here and speak to this. If you look at the color of my hair and the wrinkles on my skin, you might realize I'm a child of the 60s. And when I was 17 years old, I came to the University of Denver as a freshman. And that fall, Martin Luther King came to speak on the campus. I certainly didn't know then what I know now and what was coming down the road on that. But it was certainly a powerful speech. And when I told my father about that speech, as a wise old man of 17, we didn't agree. He had a real issue with Martin Luther King and him being such a radical and pushing so hard when it wasn't really necessary. And I started off on a little bit different path because of that day. As we got further down the road, 1967, Martin Luther King gave a speech in New York in front of about 3,000 people talking about the Vietnam War. And a lot of people said, don't go there, just take care of what you've got. We know you're taking care of civil rights. Why on earth would you mess with the Vietnam War? But the Vietnam War needed, seriously, to be messed with. And it was another shining example for me of how to move forward and what I should be paying attention to and what I should be doing. And one of the problems he had with that Vietnam War is an issue that we still have today. Just like you heard Representative Williams talk about, is the issues did not go away. He was saying that so much of that war, so much investment in the military, so much investment so far overseas took away from what we can do to take care of the welfare of our people at home. Domestic programs to give people a hand up were suffering because of all the money we spent on our wars. And today, we're spending trillions of dollars during and after our wars. That we're still out there, thousands of miles away, enacting wars and taking away from our domestic care of our own people and our own population. So I learned that from Martin Luther King also. And then, that fateful day when he was assassinated, while I was still in my first 4 years, when you go away to college, it's sort of when you grow up. Well, my first 4 years, he was assassinated. And I realized that sometimes in this country, we are not on a continuing arc of moving forward. We have setbacks. We have gun violence. We have gun violence that takes away some of the most important and inspiring people we have amongst us. And from that time on, it kind of turned in a more difficult direction. But I've been there, and the arc that I started on from listening to Martin Luther King ends here, is the work I'm trying to do for the people of Colorado. And I want to thank him for that inspiration.
Is there any further discussion? The question before us is the adoption of HJR 1005. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Say no. HJR 1005 is adopted. Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the morning roll call be added as co-sponsors.
The motion is to add the current roll call. Would you make that current, please?
I'm sorry, the current roll call as
That the current roll call be added as co-sponsors of House Bill 1005. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. HJR 1005 is adopted. Announcements and introductions. Representative McCann.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just noticed our former Senator Penfield Tate is in the audience. I'd like to recognize him. He's a constituent of mine. Thank you for coming.
Welcome, Representative Tate. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Seeing no further announcements or introductions, we are going to...
Madam Majority Leader, do we have further? Oh, I thought maybe Mr. Tyler did, but sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, go right ahead.
Seeing no further announcements or introductions, except for maybe J. Paul Brown. It seems like he's coming down here, so I'm just going to hold off for a moment.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to invite you to the prayer caucus that we have on Tuesday mornings at 7:15 breakfast. It'll be downstairs in, I think, 107, but sure like to invite you next Tuesday morning to that. Thank you.
Now, Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Last chance for announcements and introductions, seeing none. We are going to go ahead and do a couple things. I just want to explain this before I do it. We will start the joint session promptly at 11 a.m., but because that is a joint session, I'm going to go ahead and make the following motion. I move that the House stand in recess until 1 p.m. later today, January 16th. Thank you.
Just remember, folks, to be here a little before 11, 5 to 11, 5 or 10 minutes early. There will be a crowd for the joint session, and the motion is to recess until 1 p.m. this afternoon. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We will be in recess until 1, and members at 1 o'clock, you do not need to return. Members, please take your seats. The joint session will come to order. Senate Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I move that the morning roll call of the Senate be made the Senate roll call of the joint session.
Seeing no objection, the morning roll call of the Senate will be made the Senate roll call for the joint session. House Majority Leader Duran.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I move that the current roll call of the House be made the House roll call of the joint session.
Seeing no objection, the morning roll call of the House will be made the House roll call for the joint session. Seeing no objection, the morning roll call of the House will be made the roll call of the joint session. A quorum is present. As is customary, it is my privilege and honor to present this gavel to the presiding officer of the Senate, Madam President Pro Tem, with the request that you preside over the proceedings.
Slight adjustment needed. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the Joint Committee comprised of Senators Woods and Guzman and Representatives Salazar, Esgar, and Willett escort the Chief Justice into the House chamber? And the joint session will be at ease while we await the Chief Justice. The joint session will come back to order. Chief Sergeant of the House, Wallen.
President Pro Tem, Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, the Chief Justice of the Colorado Supreme Court, the Honorable Nancy E. Wright.
It is my pleasure and honor to present to you the Honorable Nancy E. Rice, Chief Justice of the State of Colorado.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Please have a seat. President Cadman, I'm not sure if he's here, but President Cadman, Speaker Hollinghorst, and certainly all of you members of the General Assembly, I see General Kaufman is here. It's an odd name, but yes, we'll go with it. General Kaufman, thank you so much for coming. And honored guests, I'm just delighted to have received your invitation to be able to give you the State of the Judiciary speech. It's truly a pleasure to be here and to talk to you about one of my favorite things, which is the judicial branch. And I'm going to tell you some things about how we've been doing in the past 2 years since you heard from my predecessor, Chief Justice Bender, and then some of our plans for the next couple of years. But before I do that, I want to introduce some people to you. Most particularly, I want to introduce my colleagues. Unfortunately, Greg Hobbs is not able to be with us today, and he's teaching, and not surprisingly, he's teaching water law, so Greg does that. But I want you to meet Justice Ben Coates. Ben, if you could stand up. Justice Coates has a background as a district attorney and also in the AG's office. He is responsible, all of the justices are given administrative jobs, which are really important, and Ben is responsible for criminal rules, instructions, and he's done a lot of work in that area, and also attorney regulation. Seated next to him, and we go in order always, is Allison Ide. Allison. Allison is the former solicitor before she joined us, also a professor at CU. We're very glad to have Allison because she helps us out with civil rules and appellate rules. She's kind of a rules geek. And so that is really, really nice to have her working with us. Next to her is Monica Marquez. Monica comes from the Attorney General's office as well. With us, she helps Justice Coates with the attorney regulation, and also she's very important dealing with what we call public access. That is how people on the outside get information about the judicial branch, and does a very nice job with that. So thank you, Monica. Next to her is Brian Boatwright, Justice Brian Boatwright. Justice Boatwright is one of a trial judge. He's one of the 3 trial judges on the court. He comes to us from Jefferson County, just got retained. We're very proud of him for that. Also, Monica Marquez just got retained. Justice Boatwright is very, very instrumental in judicial education, which is quite important, and also juvenile and family matters. So thank you for that, Brian. Next to him is Will Hood. Justice Hood comes to us from the Denver District Court. He's only been with us for about a year. He's been very involved in access to justice initiatives, and we thank him very much for that. Jerry Maroney, who's our state court administrator, is not able to be with us today. He had some family emergencies, but he used to be a judge in Pueblo, and we are just so happy to have him helping us on the administrative side. And then, as you know, I am Nancy E. Rice. I was born in Boulder, Colorado, but grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I actually came to the court from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was also a Denver District Court judge, like my colleague Will Hood, and have been on the court for about 16 years before my colleagues last year elected me to be the Chief Justice. I've invited some other guests because I think sometimes it's unclear to everyone just exactly how we organize ourselves. It's odd, actually. It's not a very vertical organization, although it seems somewhat like it might be. We are rather what we call a group of sort of loosely coupled organizations, which is what the MBA types would call us, which means that while I am the head of the branch of government, we have districts and other courts which actually manage themselves. We have 22 district courts, and we have a court of appeals. I'd like to introduce you to Dan Taubman, who's here representing the Court of Appeals. Dan is very, very involved with access to justice concerns. And then we also have what we call the various chief judges of the districts. There are, as I said, 22 districts. The chiefs are my primary advisors. They really keep me in the know of what's going on with respect in the courts. There's no way I could really know otherwise. And then we have, of those 22, they elect among themselves what we call the Chief of Chiefs. And I invited the Chief of Chiefs to be here. And so Jim Hartman is here. Jim Hartman is the chief judge in Greeley, also a water judge up there. I also invited Mick O'Hare. Chief Judge O'Hare is from the Steamboat region, and he also is a water up there as well as being the chief judge. And then Mike Martinez. Mike Martinez is from Denver District Court, my old court. Justice Hood's old court. And so they're the Chief of Chiefs, and very much it's this group of us judges who manage. You know, you probably have never really thought about it, but what's interesting about the way the judicial branch is set up is that we get appointed generally because we're decent lawyers, and then we get made chief judges because we're pretty good judges. Along the way, we don't know anything about managing. I mean, I have to tell you, we don't know about budgeting, we don't know about human relations, we don't know anything about much except law and being good judges. And so we have to kind of cling to each other and teach each other how to be good managers. And with your help, we have in fact done that in these last couple of years. You've given us some funds for leadership, management kind of training. And everybody that you can see and that I've introduced has gone through that training, and that's been extremely, extremely helpful. So thank you for that. I'd like to introduce also the last part of our management team, which is Chris Ryan. Chris, if you don't mind standing up, I can see you hate this. Chris is the clerk for the combined appellate courts, and seated next to him is Kristen Burke, who is my counsel. I also have other family and friends with us, and I'm not going to introduce them because they've asked me not to. They don't want to be embarrassed, but they're here supporting me. So leadership has been a very, very good thing for us, and as a result of our leadership and management, and I think we have really developed that in the judicial branch, we've been able to accomplish some things in the last year, and that's to say that we've accomplished those things with your help. I have to tell you, we've so much appreciated what you've done for us. One of the biggest things that we've been able to accomplish is technology. We are almost at what they call the last mile in terms of getting our various courts plugged in completely. Civil filing is finished. That is to say that everything now is online. We've become virtually paperless, with the exception of pro ses in civil. And in terms of criminal filing, we've started that, criminal e-filing. We're paperless in Pueblo. It's going very well. We're about to go paperless now in Fort Collins, and we'll go through the rest of the state. That whole e-filing or paperless has turned out much better than we thought it would. People are not as upset, and it's a very efficient thing for most attorneys. In the probation area, thanks to you all, we've gotten new case officers. We got, as a result of having new case officers, we've been able to do better in terms of probation. And that sort of reminds me that sometimes in talking with people, people have said, you know, what really is the difference between probation and parole, and why are you all probation, et cetera? And so at the risk of being condescending, I don't mean to be at all, but let me just refresh your recollection that probation is when someone is sentenced by a judge not to prison, not to the Department of Corrections, but for something less than that, usually either to be home or to have some kind of supervision, but not to go to prison. And so we keep people out of prison as a result of probation. That's to be compared with parole, where somebody goes to prison and then DOC decides whether or not they're able to leave the prison. So the judicial branch is in charge of probation, and they make up a very large part of our funding. You tend to think probably of judicial as courts. We're also probation. And so as a result of you giving us new probation officers, we've been able to really go to town on what we call evidence-based sentencing and evidence-based supervision. And all that basically means is that in the old days, a judge might know a prior record, might know where the offender lived, something like that, really some fairly basic information, and then would sort of, almost as a shot in the dark, be able to sentence that person. Now we're able to test them, we're able to have what we call evidence-based, very clear factual idea of who this offender is, what treatment he needs, and how we can best serve him. And we have 17 new evidence-based programs as a result of being able to have these new officers. It's made a huge difference. We've, as a result of that, been able not to put people in prison for violating probation. And according to our information, we've saved you all, saved the state, $36.6 million. So I think that's very significant. We've also very, very much appreciate the new judges you gave us last year in the 18th. The 18th is, of course, Douglas and Arapahoe County. You only need to open the paper once, I think, to know that there are special things going on in that particular district. They badly, badly, badly needed those new judges. Thank you so much for giving them to us. I don't know how we would have managed without them. I also want to talk about another thing that you did for us last year, which was to pass the underfunded facility bill. You will recall that there are many courthouses around the state of Colorado that are really in very bad shape. One of the things that I have done as the new Chief Justice is travel around the state, which was great fun, and I went to, I think, about 16 or 17 of the judicial districts. But I saw for myself some of these courthouses, and some of them are really terrible, I have to tell you. The worst are in Walsenburg, in Pagosa Springs, and in Cortez. And when I mean terrible, I mean truly terrible. In Walsenburg, for example, and I mean no disrespect, there was bat shit on the judges' chairs. I guess I don't have to be all that respectful to the bat shit, but you know what I mean. So it was, you know, it's terrible. Somebody sort of needs to say that. So thank you so much for the underfunded facilities, because as a result of the underfunded facilities, we've set up a grant program, and we're able to take a little bit of money from this grant program along with the Department of Local Affairs money, and we're able to also then, I guess I would say, communicate very strongly with the county commissioners that now this is really something that needs to be taken care of. And in the case of, say, for example, Walsenburg, Pagosa Springs, Cortez, our three worst courthouses, it's going to make a huge difference. And thank you so much for that. And finally, I'd like to talk about the Carr Center, our new building, which of course was built as a result of you all being so very kind and helping us with that funding. We've been in that building, we still call it the new building, we've been in that building for 2 years. It is still fantastic, and if you haven't been there, please come. A couple of things have happened, though, with respect to that building that we didn't anticipate, which is that it has become a meeting place. It has become a new place for people to gather in this side of town. We didn't realize there was even the lack of such a place, but as soon as we build this building, people are coming. And over the last 2 years, for example, we've had 75 receptions alone in our atrium, which is it's just really quite amazing. Our Learning Center, which we like to brag about, which is wonderful. If you haven't been over there to see it and see our movie, to see all of the exhibits, has already been attended by 15,000 kids, 15,000 kids. So that has only been open for about a year and a half. I think we're making a difference as a result of that building in so many ways. It has truly become a public resource. The Attorney General is housed in that building, and I think General Kaufman would agree with me that we are really putting that building to good use, and we thank you for it very much. I'd also like to tell you that by all estimates, the judicial branch has been doing a good job over the last couple of years. We have what we call performance measures. These measures are extremely helpful in sort of helping us, if you will, determine how we should evaluate ourselves. And we ask people, after they get out of a court proceeding, a trial or something like that, just to answer some questions. Some of these questions are things like the way my case was handled was fair. The judge listened to my side of the case. I knew what I was supposed to do next as I left the courthouse. We are routinely in the high 60s, if not low 70s, in terms of people who are saying yes to that. I wish we were higher. I wish we were in the 80s or 90s, but you have to remember that half of these people have lost, so they're not exactly happy when they're walking out and taking this survey. So I figure anything over 50% is pretty good. We're at the high 60s, low 70s, so I think we're doing really very well. But here's the thing, we can do so much better. We're a great branch of government. We have great people leading it, and we can do so much better. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the kinds of things that will help us do better. First, and this is the only real bill that will be coming before you, is we would very, very much appreciate it if you all give us a new judge for Alamosa, for the San Luis Valley. Yesterday, the chief judge in that area, Patty Swift, and I testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee, and I thought it was a very vigorous session. And at the end of that, the House voted unanimously to pass that on, and we're very, very happy about that. If there's any questions that I can answer with respect to that bill, I would like to, because we do need one new judge in the San Luis Valley. And the other thing that I'd like to talk to you about is a little bit more philosophical, and that's, what are we as a court going to be? When I come back and talk to you in 2 years, what am I really going to be talking to you about? And what that has to do with is with this growing and continuing issue of people who are not represented by lawyers coming into our courts. So I've been a judge for about 25, 26 years, either at the trial level or the Supreme Court level. And the difference between when I started, the attitude is that people would come in, they would have a lawyer, I would talk to the lawyers, they would present their evidence, I would decide the case, and that would be it. It's quite different now. What happens is people come in, 60 to 70% in domestic cases, and they don't have lawyers. And what's even more interesting, and what's, I think, truly a paradigm shift, is that many of them are not poor people. They're not people who cannot afford attorneys. They are people who, for whatever reason, think that they can represent themselves. They don't want to pay for attorneys. And they come to the courts, and they're causing all sorts of problems, frankly, because the system is best dealt with in terms of attorneys. But, the fact of the matter is, we in the judiciary have a monopoly on certain services. Nobody else can give you a divorce. You can't go to Target and buy a divorce. You can't go to Target and buy a restraining order, can you? So if you want that, you have to come to the court, and therefore, we are the branch that has the power. And as Spider-Man's grandfather said to him, with great power comes great responsibility. So we are simply going to have to respond to that responsibility. So how are we going to do that? Well, let me give you another anecdote from my past to help you understand where I'm coming from. When I was a brand new district court judge, I was probably 38, very young. I went out into a courtroom that was quite big. It was a domestic relations courtroom. My first day on the bench, and it was filled with about 60 or 70 people in the courtroom. I called the first case Smith versus Smith. 2 people came up and they said, we're not ready. We haven't had a chance to talk. We don't have lawyers. I don't have any idea what's going on. I said, okay, we'll go over there. Next case, Jones, same thing, go over there. Next things, Smith, go over there. It was chaos, frankly. Domestic relations was not working. It was taking an awful long time for the judicial branch to come up with some basic fundamental services. So what have we done over the years? Really, the last 25 years, it's been interesting watching this evolution. What have we done over the years to make this better? Well, first, and this is mostly with respect to domestic relations, we came up with this concept of family court facilitators. In other words, you talk to somebody other than the judge first, and you say to this person, I don't think we're going to have a problem about property division, but we really are going to have a problem about how we're going to do custody with respect to children. And that person helps and kind of determines what should happen next. Triage, really, it's very much like the medical profession. We have a triage nurse. But then the next thing that happened is we found a lot of people who were coming into the courts and they just didn't know what they wanted to do at all. And sometimes it had to do with domestic relations, and sometimes it had to do with just something as simple as getting a name change. And so we developed this new position in our branch of government called, very unfortunately, a self-represented litigant coordinator. In other words, somebody who is themselves representing them. And that's a terrible name, and it's a terrible acronym too, SHLRC. So we got away with that, and we call these people Sherlocks. They're chasing down answers. They're like Sherlock Holmes. And so you're going to be hearing about Sherlocks, and I think Mike Bender talked to you about Sherlocks when he was here. We have a number of Sherlocks now around the courts in all of our districts, and this is what's the most amazing thing to me. They've been in place, I'd say, a couple of years, but just in 2014, the Sherlocks talked to 100,000 people who came into our courts and wanted questions, and had questions and wanted answers. So let me repeat that because I think it's so stunning. 100,000 people. And we have to respond to those folks, and we think that the Sherlocks are helping us do that. And the other thing that we're trying to do to sort of change the way we do business, in addition to Sherlocks, is to have a much better web presence and web access. And so we've rewritten our web so that now if somebody goes on and wants to find out something about a case, instead of having a lot of legal jargon, it says this: were you sued? Go here. Do you want to sue somebody? Go here. And we kind of get them directed. It's very, very straightforward language. We've rolled this out just a few months ago. I don't want to take a lot of your time. I know you've been doing a lot of ceremonial things this week. But I want to tell you just how strongly I feel about the judiciary and how strongly I think my colleagues do as well. I know my colleagues do as well. When I was a kid, I grew up in Boulder and Cheyenne. I can be from lots of different places. I sort of tell people I-25, just you choose. But my grandparents lived in Trinidad, and my grandfather was a mechanic, worked for the mines, but before they closed, but he was a mechanic, but his best friend was the judge in town. And so when, on the rare occasion that they would have a trial, he would go down and be the bailiff and get all dressed up, wash his hands. I remember this so very clearly. And I would spend my summers with him. And so I would get to go down and be the bailiff with him, of course, and put out the water and the pencils and the legal pads and whatnot. I have to tell you, I love that beyond words. And ever since then, I've always wanted to be in the legal system. People say to me, well, you always wanted to be a judge. And I think in reality, I always wanted to be a bailiff. But, you know, here I am. So, you know, things work out the way they work out. But I have to tell you that really from the time I was about 10 years old, the courts, the judicial branch, has become my calling. And it truly, I use the word calling very advisedly. That's who I am. I could be nothing else. And I think that most of my colleagues feel the same way. We care so much about the judicial branch. So thank you all so very much for helping us. We want to be a great judicial branch, and we can be, and with your help, I know we will be. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Justice Rice. And I want to say it was very engaging, and the words you said we wouldn't necessarily be allowed to say without getting gavelled. We might have to call it guano instead, but thank you. Will the committee escort the Chief Justice from the chamber? Representative Duran.
Representative Duran.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Duran, but now I'm going to ask for Senator Sheffel.
Thank you, President Roberts. I move the joint session be dissolved.
There being no objection to Senator Sheffel's motion, the joint session is dissolved.